Hi, let us have a quick overview on networking within Docker. I can have Docker in a single host environment or in a multi-host environment like Swarm. And networking works in a single host environment as well as in a multi-host environment. And we need to have a networking setup so that the containers can communicate within itself, as well as from outside world. I should be in a position to communicate to the containers, and containers should be in a position to communicate with the outside world, as well as across the host should be in a position to communicate. And we are going to have a detailed understanding on the single host networking first, and then we will move on to the multi-host networking. Let's understand the frequently used terminologies within the networking. Let's have a quick overview and move on to the demo. Let's assume I do have a single host, and within the host it will get an IP address from the router. In this case, the router is having the IP address 192.168.1.1, and that's going to assign the IP address 192.168.1.2 to this particular host on the Ethernet ETH0. And within the host, once if I install the Docker and start the Docker daemon, that's going to create a bridge networking, and that is created using the software defined network SDN. And the bridge networking, it's going to act like a router where that's going to have the name as Docker 0. That's the default name that gets assigned, and that's going to have an IP address similar to this 172.19.0.1. And any container that I'm going to create within this particular host, that will get an unique IP address, and that will be the responsibility of this particular bridge router. And based on the subnet, I should be in a position to create maximum of 255 multiplied by 255 containers or a unique IP address. In this case, I do have 3 containers, container 1, 2 and 3. And each will get unique IP address 172.19.02.03.0.4. Whenever I am going to communicate to a specific container, for this case, I am going to communicate to the container 1, the Docker 0 bridge will take the responsibility of sending the packets to that particular container, and the Ethernet will be first communicating with the Docker 0, and then the packets will be sent to that specific container. And whenever I am communicating to the host, I will be communicating to a specific port so that that port will be mapped to the container. For example, I may map the port 5000 to the port 80 of container 1. So whenever I am starting or updating a container with this particular port mapping, any data being sent to the port 5000, it will be mapped to the port 80 of this specific container 1. And same way, I can map a different port to a different port within the same container or in a different container. Let's assume I am going to map the port 8080 to this specific container in the port 5000. So what happens, any data being sent to the port 5001 to the host, it will be mapped to 8080 of container 2. And port 5000, any data that it is receiving, it will be mapped to port 80. And every container will have a virtual namespace for itself. So that's the scope of the networking. So when I say virtual namespace, this specific container, that is container 1, may not be aware of what's happening or where this particular container 2 or what is the IP address of the container 2. So they cannot communicate within each other. To make or establish the communication, I have to create a networking namespace so that it connects these two networking namespace or these two containers. So I need to have an overlapping networking namespace so that each of these two containers know each other, what is their IP address and how to communicate. So this is where the creation of custom bridge networking comes into picture. And this is what we are going to see through a demo, and how to establish the communication between the containers within a single host, and how the data communication happens from the container to the outside world and from outside world to the container. So in a quick summary, we have seen what is the networking namespace and the default bridge that is getting created, and how the port mappings will be working within the networking in a single host environment.